Hi, I'm Thomas Broadhead. I'm the editor of the Critical Performance edition of the Ives 4 Symphony. And in this video, we're going to talk about Ives' quotations, specifically some of the more interesting ones where they are hidden in the texture in places where you wouldn't expect to find them. And then segue from that into a larger question of whether or not Ives was in fact the very first sound mass composer. Just as 12-tone composers found and still find creative ways to use a row, Ives does the same with the tunes he weaves into his polytemporal tapestry. Often the tunes are hidden, but you'll have an aha moment when they reveal themselves. Here's a page from the second movement, and the passage is best known for the tune in the trumpets, Columbia, the Gem of the Ocean. But there are several other tunes running concurrently, and one is a perfect example of the creative ways that Ives found of using the tunes. Let's look at the violins. The first violins are playing septuplets, and the second violins are playing quintuplets. They're playing repeated patterns, and the patterns repeat across several pages. So let's look at them in isolation. Here's the first violin alone. The septuplet figure is repeated and shifted chromatically. Let's listen to just a bit of it. It doesn't sound like anything though, so is there really a quote hiding here? If you just look at the first note of each figure and listen to all of those notes in sequence, you may be able to identify it. If you know your Ives tunes, you'll recognize that as Nettleton. The same goes with the second violin part, which is using the Nettleton hymn and its quintuplet figure. Again, look at the first notes of each figure, and you'll once again see it's the Nettleton theme. When played together, it's a wild figure that contributes to the sound of the speeding locomotive in the program of the music. But it's also a polyrhythmic atonal gesture that outlines Nettleton as Ives stamps it across the passage. But what's the context? It depends on the recording and how it was recorded, but it's quite the speeding mastodon, with all the individual parts creating a wall of sound, with the trumpets cutting through it. Nettleton is hiding in various transformations throughout the sound mass polyphony of the symphony. Here's another passage with several instances of Nettleton, along with many other tunes. Let's look at the clarinet line. Again, it helps to see it in isolation. Here it is in the player's part. This time, we don't have a figure that repeats chromatically, but instead, a continuous line that repeatedly rises to an accented note that's different each time. Let's listen to just a bit of it. Can you hear Nettleton? It's in the accented note at the top of each rise. Sometimes Ives will stretch out a quotation across consecutive passages. He does this with Nettleton and the low bells, starting in the Battle of the Triplets section and continuing on into the passage that follows. It functions as a kind of cantus firmus. When the scoring is light, these kinds of clever layerings create a lively polytemporal polyphony. But when they reach critical mass, you get that wall of sound, and there's an obvious question. Was Ives the first sound mass composer? This music is far more hyper than the sound mass compositions of Ligeti and similar composers. But notice the key difference. The conventional sound mass composers work with blocks of dissonant chords that are superimposed, often with internal activity, but the basic orientation is vertical. By contrast, Ives is creating sound masses horizontally with superimposed melodies and transmogrifications of quoted tunes. It's still sound mass, but the direction of writing is left to right, not top to bottom. But it's not always harsh. Often, Ives layers those melodies, almost always quotations, and a swirling, soft polytemporal wash. From my color-coded quotation analysis that's part of the critical edition, here's a page from the finale. From the top down here, we have Dornance and Missionary Chant, Bethany, There is a Happy Land, Bethany, Westminster Chimes, St. Hilda, Martin, Missionary Chant, Proprior Deo and Something for Thee, Dornance and Missionary Chant, Westminster Chimes, There is a Happy Land, Missionary Chant, Martin, and Missionary Chant. In this sound mass, Ives circles around a tonality and transports us to a familiar cadential pattern that rises from the mist before taking us to the tonic. Now, as we've seen and heard, there's sound mass writing throughout the Fourth Symphony, but it can also be found in other works of Ives, such as the Housatonic at Stockbridge, Hanover Square North, and especially the 4th of July. But nothing quite equals the beauty of the sound mass ending of this piece.